Imagine this. You've built a life with someone. You've planned the future together, stood before family and friends, exchanged vows that promised forever. And then, without warning, it all vanishes. Not with a fight, not with a tearful conversation, not even with a single goodbye. Instead, what lands on your doorstep is a cardboard FedEx box, and inside that box is your wedding ring. The ring that once symbolized love, commitment, eternity. How would you feel? Betrayed? Humiliated? Confused? Maybe all three. That's exactly what Trevor Engelson lived through when Meghan Markle, his wife of just 2 years, walked away from their marriage without so much as a goodbye. No explanation, no closure, just silence. And now, 12 years later, he is finally breaking that silence, opening up about what really happened, and his revelations are as chilling as they are heartbreaking. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Because let's be honest, breakups are painful, but there's usually at least a conversation, an ending you can wrap your mind around. But when the ending is nothing more than an absence, a void, that wounds in a way words cannot explain. And that's where Trevor's story begins, with a disappearance, a ghosting, a calculated coldness that leaves us asking, who was Meghan Markle really, long before she became Duchess of Sussex? The truth is, this isn't just the story of a failed Hollywood marriage. It's a story about ambition, about reinvention, about the pursuit of power, fame, and identity at the expense of loyalty and love. It's about the choices someone makes when they decide that their future matters more than the people who stood by them in their past. And Trevor, unknowingly, became the first casualty of Meghan's calculated rise. Think about the timing. When Meghan left Trevor, she was on the cusp of a breakthrough. She'd landed a role on Suits, a legal drama filmed in Toronto that would catapult her into international recognition. But with that role came distance, both physical and emotional. Trevor remained in Los Angeles, building his producing career, while Meghan immersed herself in a new city, a new circle of friends, a new identity. And slowly, Trevor began to notice the calls grew shorter, the texts less frequent, the warmth fading. Have you ever felt someone slipping away from you, piece by piece, until one day you realize they're gone? That's the slow bleed Trevor experienced before Meghan's final, brutal act of ghosting. And yet, what makes this story even more shocking isn't just the way it ended. It's what it reveals about Meghan herself. Because this wasn't a one-off act of coldness. No, this was the beginning of a pattern, a cycle of discarding people once they no longer served her narrative. A pattern that would later repeat itself in her relationship with the royal family, with her own father, with friends who had once defended her, and even with the institution of the monarchy itself. Trevor's story is not just a personal heartbreak, it's a warning sign the world ignored. But let's pause here. Let's imagine Trevor, sitting in his home in Los Angeles. He's been married for 2 years, still believing he and Meghan can weather the challenges of long-distance love. He sends her messages, calls her, tries to bridge the gap. And then one day, the doorbell rings. A courier hands him a box. Inside, he finds the ring he placed on her finger, the promise he made to her, returned to him like a package, like a transaction completed. No note, no call, just silence. Can you imagine the hollow feeling that must bring? Can you imagine realizing the person you thought you knew could leave you with nothing more than a FedEx label? And here's the thing. Ghosting, as painful as it is in casual relationships, is brutal enough. But in a marriage, in a bond that was supposed to be built on trust and respect, it feels cruel. It feels calculated. It feels cold. Trevor himself has said he didn't get a goodbye. He got a FedEx box. That line alone tells you everything you need to know about the emotional devastation. But why would Meghan do this? Why choose such a detached, almost clinical way of ending a marriage? Was it cowardice, an inability to face conflict? Or was it strategy, a way of closing one chapter with no strings attached, no messy emotions, no ties to hold her back? This is the question that lingers, and it's one that haunts not just Trevor, but anyone who has followed Meghan's story since. Because, and let's be brutally honest here, ghosting someone is not just about avoidance. It's about control. It's about denying the other person the chance to speak, to respond, to hold you accountable. When Meghan chose silence, she chose power. And in doing so, she left Trevor with nothing but questions. Questions he couldn't answer for 12 long years. And now he finally is. And his truth isn't wrapped in anger or revenge. It's wrapped in sadness, in disbelief, in the simple heartbreak of a man blindsided by the woman he loved. His voice cracks as he recounts how it happened, how he was left behind, how he received not a conversation but a courier delivery. And that vulnerability makes his story all the more powerful. But why does this matter now? Why does Trevor's silence breaking matter to us, more than a decade after the fact? Because it's not just about him. It's about understanding the roots of Meghan Markle's choices, the way she treats relationships, the way she navigates loyalty and ambition. It's about connecting the dots between her past and her present, and realizing that the ghosting of Trevor Engelson wasn't an isolated act. It was the blueprint for everything that came after. And here's where we create the curiosity gap. Because Trevor's revelations don't just paint Meghan as cold. They raise questions about how much of her future relationships, including her marriage to Prince Harry, might follow the same trajectory. If she could ghost a husband overnight, with no warning, what else is she capable of leaving behind when the spotlight demands it? But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Right now, we're with Trevor at the beginning of his heartbreak, the moment where love turned into silence, where marriage dissolved into a FedEx delivery. And as we peel back the layers of this story, we'll discover how Meghan's exit from Trevor's life wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was the first sign of a larger pattern the world would one day see. Because if Trevor was blindsided by her disappearance, imagine how the royal family must have felt when she and Harry stepped away from their royal duties. Imagine how friends must have felt when Meghan cut them off after their usefulness ended. Imagine how her own father must have felt when the phone calls stopped, when the wedding invite never came. Trevor's pain was personal, but it was also prophetic. And that is why this story matters now. It matters because the past has a way of echoing into the present. And Trevor's revelations force us to ask hard questions, not just about Meghan Markle, but about the people we trust, the people we love, the people who promise forever and then disappear without a trace. But as shocking as Trevor's truth is, as heartbreaking as it feels to imagine, what came next in his journey would change everything. And no one, not even Meghan, could have seen it coming. The love story between Trevor Engelson and Meghan Markle didn't begin with heartbreak. No, it started with the kind of charm and chemistry that makes Hollywood rom-coms look tame. Imagine this: Los Angeles in the mid-2000s, where young creatives were hustling every day, chasing auditions, chasing scripts, chasing that elusive shot at fame. Trevor was already making his way as a film producer, respected within certain circles, carving out a niche in a cutthroat industry. Meghan, on the other hand, was still on the outskirts, a hopeful actress working tirelessly to land roles, attending casting calls, and navigating the ruthless ladder of Hollywood. And then, fate, or ambition, depending on how you see it, brought them together. Trevor was charmed. Meghan had that magnetic quality, the kind of presence that could light up a room before she even spoke a word. She had an energy that pulled people in. And for Trevor, it felt like more than just attraction. It felt like possibility. Isn't that how most love stories begin? With possibility? With the belief that you've found someone who sees you, understands you, wants to build something with you? For Trevor, that's exactly what Meghan represented. And for Meghan? Well, that's where things start to get interesting. At the beginning, Meghan played the part perfectly. She was supportive, warm, eager. Friends described their relationship as intense, passionate, and deep. They vacationed together, appeared inseparable at parties, and looked every bit like a couple on the rise. Trevor's career gave Meghan a window into Hollywood connections, while Meghan's charm and drive gave Trevor something he hadn't had before, a partner who seemed to match his ambition stride for stride. But let's ask the question that lingers now, in hindsight. Was Meghan truly in love with Trevor, or was she in love with the idea of what he represented? Because remember, Meghan was an actress, someone who could step into roles, adapt, play the part. And many have wondered, looking back, whether her relationship with Trevor was, in some ways, one of the biggest roles she ever played. Still, at the time, no one questioned it. Their courtship seemed real, genuine, enviable. After 7 years of dating, Trevor proposed. 7 years, think about that. That's not a whirlwind fling. That's nearly a decade of building a bond. 7 years of memories, of struggles, of victories. 7 years of believing that you know a person. And Trevor did. Or at least, he thought he did. The wedding itself was nothing short of idyllic. In 2011, they tied the knot in Jamaica, surrounded by friends and family, in a celebration that was wild, carefree, and joyful. Guests recalled it being a party more than a formal wedding, with laughter, dancing, and the kind of happiness that makes people believe in forever. For Trevor, it was the beginning of the rest of his life. For Meghan, perhaps it was the beginning of a different kind of plan. Because even during those early days, small cracks were forming, cracks that would later split wide open. Meghan was ambitious, laser-focused on her career, unwilling to let anything stand in her way. Trevor, though successful, wasn't climbing the same ladder Meghan was now aiming for. He was behind the scenes, a producer, not the one in the spotlight. And Meghan? She wanted the spotlight. This is where the tension began to build. It wasn't dramatic at first. No screaming matches, no public meltdowns. It was quieter than that. Subtler. It was in the way Meghan started prioritizing auditions and opportunities over Trevor's world. In the way she shifted conversations from their shared life to her career trajectory. In the way she began networking relentlessly, spending more time with people who could advance her ambitions than with her own husband. But Trevor didn't see it as a red flag. Not yet. He believed in her. He wanted her to succeed. He encouraged her, supported her, stood behind her when roles didn't land, and celebrated with her when small victories came. Isn't that what love is supposed to look like? Standing by your partner, believing in them, lifting them higher? That's exactly what Trevor did. And in return, Meghan gave him enough to keep him hooked, to keep the illusion alive. She smiled. She played the part of the loving wife. She let him believe that they were in it together. And maybe, for a time, she believed it too. But here's the question. When love and ambition collide, which one survives? For Meghan Markle, the answer became clear when opportunity knocked. And knock it did. Because right at the moment when she and Trevor should have been settling into married life, Meghan got the call that would change everything. Her big break on Suits. It was the role of a lifetime, the kind of role every struggling actor dreams of. A steady job, a major character, a chance to shine on screen in front of millions. But it came with a cost. The show wasn't filmed in Los Angeles. It was filmed in Toronto, Canada, which meant distance, which meant a marriage stretched across borders, which meant Trevor in LA, Meghan in another country, both trying to hold on to something that was slowly slipping through their fingers. And here's the cliffhanger. Meghan took that role. She packed her bags. She moved to Toronto. And in doing so, she didn't just begin a new chapter in her career. She began the slow unraveling of her marriage. Because what Trevor didn't realize at the time was that Meghan wasn't just stepping into a new role on TV. She was stepping into a new role in her life. And this time, Trevor wasn't written into the script. Was Meghan already planning her escape? That's the question people can't help but ask when they look back at her marriage to Trevor Engelson. Because when you trace the timeline, when you piece together the decisions, the distance, the subtle shifts in priorities, it starts to look less like a sudden heartbreak and more like a carefully staged exit. Let's step into that period of Meghan's life. The year is 2011. She's newly married to Trevor, her wedding in Jamaica still fresh in the memories of friends who said they had never seen her so happy. She's smiling in photos, radiant in candid shots, the picture of a newlywed bride. But beneath that smile, something else is brewing. Just months into the marriage, Meghan gets the news. She's been cast in Suits. Now, let's be real. For an actress grinding through auditions, commercials, and small guest roles, this was the jackpot. Not just another forgettable appearance. Not a background role. A steady, central character on a primetime show filmed in Toronto. Meghan wasn't just getting a job. She was stepping into a career-making opportunity. And while for most people this would mean celebration and shared joy, for Trevor, it was the beginning of the end. Because here's the truth. Distance destroys even the strongest of bonds if both people aren't fully committed. And Meghan? She wasn't committed anymore. At least, not to Trevor. She was committed to something else. To herself. To her future. To the idea of Meghan Markle becoming a household name. Ask yourself this. If you had just gotten married, would you leave your new spouse behind within months to chase a career opportunity thousands of miles away? Some would say yes, it's ambition, it's the dream. Others would say no, you fight to build your marriage first, you figure out a way together. Meghan chose the former. She packed her bags, moved to Toronto, and left Trevor in Los Angeles to carry the weight of their marriage alone. And at first, Trevor believed they could make it work. Long-distance marriages exist. People travel, compromise, find ways to stay close even when apart. But in Meghan's case, that didn't happen. She immersed herself in her new life, her new city, her new circle of friends. Suits became not just a job, but an identity. She began dressing differently, speaking differently, socializing differently. The Meghan who had once leaned on Trevor was now leaning into something else entirely, the spotlight. It's here we see the first signs of Meghan's detachment. Calls grew shorter. Texts became fewer. Weekend visits turned into rare occasions. And slowly, Trevor began to realize that the woman he married was slipping away, not through one explosive fight, but through quiet neglect. That's how ghosting often begins, not with a sudden disappearance, but with the slow fade out. And this is where the suspicion arises. Was Meghan already rehearsing her exit? Because while Trevor still clung to the marriage, Meghan's focus had shifted entirely to her own narrative. She was rewriting her life script, and Trevor's character was being phased out. This wasn't just about distance. This was about alignment, or rather, misalignment. Trevor was building his world in Los Angeles, producing projects, staying grounded in the industry's background. Meghan was building hers in Toronto, but not just as an actress. She was stepping into the role of a rising star, one who wanted more than just a husband supporting her from afar. And let's not forget the irony here. Meghan had married into Hollywood, a world that thrives on connection and loyalty. Yet, when it came time to choose, she didn't choose loyalty. She chose herself. Isn't that telling? But Trevor, ever the believer, kept trying. He flew to see her, sent her love, supported her projects. Friends say he was deeply invested, unwilling to give up. Meghan, however, seemed already halfway out the door, her attention firmly fixed on what was ahead rather than what was beside her. Here's where we have to pause and ask, was Meghan's marriage to Trevor ever really about forever? Or was it always a stepping stone, something convenient until something better came along? Because when you look at how easily, how coldly, she later discarded him, the signs begin to feel less like hindsight and more like inevitability. It's the contradiction that stings. Meghan gave the world an image of a devoted wife, smiling at Trevor's side, while internally, she was preparing for her next chapter. And that's what makes this revelation so explosive. Because Trevor wasn't just blindsided by her disappearance. He was blindsided by the realization that perhaps she had been planning it all along. By now, the cracks in the marriage were visible. Trevor was still holding on, Meghan was slipping away, and the distance between Los Angeles and Toronto wasn't just measured in miles. It was measured in priorities, in loyalties, in love slowly replaced by ambition. And then came the turning point, the moment that changed everything. Because as Meghan's career soared, her connection to Trevor reached a breaking point. She had everything she wanted in front of her: fame, recognition, independence. And with all of that came a decision that would leave Trevor not just heartbroken, but utterly shattered. Because one day, without warning, Meghan's love story with Trevor wasn't just fading, it was ending. And Trevor? He didn't even know it yet. Suits, fame, distance. Three simple words that would come to define the unraveling of Meghan Markle's first marriage. When Meghan landed the role of Rachel Zane on Suits, it should have been a moment of triumph for both her and Trevor Engelson. Imagine spending years chasing an acting career, facing rejection after rejection, and then finally, the breakthrough comes. It's the kind of story people dream about. And Trevor, as her husband, should have been the one standing proudly at her side, sharing in the victory. But instead, that phone call from Toronto would become the first domino in a line that led straight to heartbreak. Because Suits wasn't filmed in Los Angeles. It was filmed in Canada, and Meghan had to relocate to Toronto, while Trevor stayed behind in LA to manage his own career. Suddenly, a couple that had spent nearly a decade together was living in different countries, with different schedules, different social circles, different lives. Now here's the thing about long-distance marriages. They demand more than just love. They demand relentless effort, constant communication, and a shared determination to bridge the miles. But while Trevor threw himself into making it work, calls, visits, sacrifices, Meghan began to drift. Think about it. Meghan had just stepped into a world where she was no longer the struggling actress. She was now the face of a major television show. She had new castmates, new friends, new admirers. Toronto embraced her, and she embraced it right back. She began to reinvent herself. Her style evolved, her social media presence grew, her lifestyle became polished, glamorous, curated. For Meghan, this wasn't just a job. It was a rebranding. And where was Trevor in all of this? He was in Los Angeles, left behind, trying to juggle his own demanding career while keeping a marriage alive with a woman who seemed to be slipping through his fingers. He still adored her, still believed in them, still thought their love could withstand the strain. But Meghan? She wasn't looking back. Friends of the couple later admitted they saw the change in Meghan almost immediately. She wasn't as invested in the marriage. She became distant, harder to reach, less willing to compromise. When Trevor flew to Toronto, she seemed distracted, busy, her attention elsewhere. When she visited Los Angeles, she was already planning her return. It was as if Trevor had become an accessory to her life, not the centerpiece. And here's where the story takes a darker turn. Because while Meghan was basking in her newfound fame, Trevor was experiencing something far more painful. The slow realization that he was no longer a priority. That sting, that subtle but undeniable feeling of being second place, is something anyone who's been in a fading relationship can recognize. You feel it in the pauses, in the silences, in the way, "I love you" starts to sound like routine instead of truth. But Trevor, ever loyal, ever hopeful, refused to give up. He told friends he believed they could push through, that this was just a rough patch, that once the novelty of Meghan's career settled, things would balance out. Isn't that what most people do when they love someone deeply? They rationalize, they wait, they believe. And Trevor believed. Yet, behind the scenes, Meghan's ambition was rewriting the script. Toronto wasn't just a temporary move. It was her chance to build a life separate from Trevor, to test what it felt like to exist without him. And the more success she tasted, the less she seemed to need her husband. Here's the irony. Trevor was proud of Meghan's success. He genuinely wanted her to shine. He supported her, bragged about her, celebrated her wins. But Meghan, instead of pulling closer to him in gratitude, used that success as fuel to distance herself even further. Have you ever known someone who, the moment they start rising, suddenly looks at you differently? As if you're part of their past, not their future? That's what Trevor was beginning to experience. And then there were the whispers. Meghan's new social life in Toronto was vibrant, full of stylish friends, parties, and attention. She was seen more with her castmates than with Trevor. People started to notice she rarely mentioned her husband, rarely brought him up in conversation, rarely acted like a newlywed at all. Trevor, meanwhile, still referred to her lovingly, still tried to keep the spark alive. But the truth was becoming clearer with every passing month. Meghan's new life in Toronto was the life she wanted. Trevor belonged to the old Meghan, the struggling actress, the Hollywood hustler. The Meghan in Toronto was evolving, shedding her past, curating her future. And Trevor? He didn't fit into that curated picture anymore. This is where the betrayal begins to sting most. Not in one single explosive moment, but in the daily accumulation of coldness. Shorter phone calls, missed anniversaries, lack of effort. It's the death of a marriage by 1,000 cuts. And Trevor, loyal to the end, was the one left bleeding. So let's ask the audience directly. What do you do when the person you love most begins to treat you like a burden instead of a partner? Do you fight harder? Or do you accept that you've been replaced, not by another person, but by ambition itself? Trevor hadn't reached that conclusion yet. Not then. He still believed, still fought, still tried. But Meghan's ghosting had already begun. Not the final, brutal ghosting that would end everything, but the preliminary stages, the emotional withdrawal, the silence, the fading warmth. And it all built toward one moment, one act, one cold decision that would blindside Trevor forever. Because soon, Meghan wouldn't just distance herself. She would disappear. And when she did, she wouldn't even give Trevor the dignity of words. She would give him a package, a FedEx box. And that single act would turn a fading marriage into a haunting betrayal. The ghosting begins. It didn't happen overnight, not at first. Ghosting rarely does. It creeps in like a shadow, subtle at the beginning, then suffocating in its silence. For Trevor Engelson, the warning signs were there, but love has a way of blinding us to the truth until it's far too late. At first, it was the small things. The phone calls that once stretched into hours became clipped, hurried, rushed. Meghan would answer with the usual enthusiasm, but the tone had changed. "I'm busy on set," she'd say. "I'm exhausted, I'll call you later." Later never came. Text messages, too, shifted. Once, they were filled with heart emojis, long paragraphs, updates about her day. Now, short, functional replies. "Okay. Got it. Talk soon." Isn't it strange how two little words can feel like daggers when you know the person behind them used to write novels to you? Trevor tried to convince himself it was the distance, the long hours, the stress of filming. Who wouldn't be tired working on a major TV show? But deep down he knew. Something was slipping. Something was breaking. Have you ever felt that invisible wall rise between you and someone you love? They're still there, still speaking, still present, but not really. Not fully. That's what Trevor was living through, day by day. Meghan was still his wife, but she was no longer his partner. And then, it escalated. When Trevor visited Toronto, the warmth was gone. Meghan seemed distracted, her mind elsewhere, her focus on everything except him. They still went out, smiled for photos, laughed at dinner parties. But behind closed doors, coldness, distance, silence. Trevor later admitted he felt like a guest in his own marriage. The home they were supposed to build together felt more like a stage Meghan had already outgrown. And Meghan? She never said the words. She never admitted she was leaving, never offered Trevor a chance to fight for their love. She just began to vanish, slowly, deliberately, until the marriage became a hollow shell. Here's the cruel truth about ghosting. It doesn't just take away the relationship, it steals the chance for closure. It denies the other person their voice, their questions, their chance to understand. Ghosting is the erasure of humanity in love. And Meghan didn't just ghost a boyfriend. She ghosted her husband. Think about that. A man who had been by her side for nearly a decade, who supported her through her struggling years, who celebrated her victories and lifted her through failures. And yet, when she decided she no longer wanted him, she didn't offer the courtesy of honesty. She offered silence. Trevor described it later with words that cut to the bone. She just disappeared. One day we were married, the next, gone. No fight, no final talk, no closure, just absence. And this is where the heartbreak sharpens into betrayal. Because ghosting isn't just about leaving, it's about control. Meghan controlled the narrative by denying Trevor his voice. She didn't want messy tears, or confrontation, or guilt. She wanted a clean slate. And the cleanest way to get that? Silence. Disappearance. But let's not forget, ghosting in a marriage isn't just cruel, it's calculated. Because Meghan didn't leave Trevor in the dark forever. She was building toward a single, devastating act that would make her disappearance official. And when that moment came, Trevor wouldn't even get the dignity of a conversation. He would get a package. Because Meghan Markle wasn't going to walk out the door, suitcase in hand. She wasn't going to sit across from Trevor and say, "This is over." She wasn't even going to pick up the phone and explain. No. She was going to end their marriage the way one returns a purchase to a store. Efficient. Detached. With no words exchanged. And Trevor? He had no idea what was about to arrive on his doorstep. The FedEx box heard around the world. It's the detail that still haunts Trevor Engelson's story. Not the distance. Not the fading texts. Not even the silence that had been slowly killing the marriage. No. What stung most, what branded itself into his memory forever, was the day a courier arrived at his door carrying the final nail in the coffin, a small, ordinary cardboard FedEx box. Inside, the wedding ring he had placed on Meghan's finger, the symbol of their vows, their love, their promise of forever. No note, no conversation, no explanation, just the ring. Think about that for a moment. Imagine standing in your home, hearing the knock, signing for the package, opening it, and realizing your marriage has just ended in the coldest, most transactional way possible. The ring you once slid onto your partner's hand as a symbol of unity returned to you as if it were an item borrowed and now casually sent back. Trevor himself would later put it in devastatingly simple words. "I didn't get a goodbye. I got a FedEx box." That's not just a line. That's a scar. Because let's be brutally honest, this wasn't an impulsive act. This wasn't Meghan in a moment of anger tossing her ring aside. Mailing back a wedding ring in a courier box requires thought. It requires intent. It requires planning. She had to take it off, package it, label it, send it. That's not emotion, that's calculation. And the message was loud and clear. This marriage wasn't just over. It wasn't even worth a conversation. Have you ever been blindsided like that? Left with no chance to argue, no chance to fix, no chance to even speak your truth? Ghosting is cruel enough. But ghosting a spouse with a courier delivery, that crosses into something far more chilling. For Trevor, that box wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was humiliation. How do you explain to family, to friends, that your wife ended things not with words, not with tears, but with a package? How do you process that the person you once called your soulmate decided you weren't worth the decency of closure? And yet, here's the contradiction that makes this story even more disturbing. Meghan Markle wasn't just anyone. She was someone Trevor had known for years, someone he'd supported, loved, believed in. This wasn't a brief romance. This was nearly a decade of history. And still, when the time came, she treated him not as a partner, not even as a person, but as a loose end to be tied up and mailed away. It leaves us with one question. Why? Why would Meghan choose such a cold, detached way of ending her marriage? Was it fear of confrontation? Or was it something more revealing? Her need for control, her refusal to be questioned, her determination to sever ties completely, without any messy loose ends? Because think about it. If she had sat down with Trevor, if she had spoken honestly, she would have had to face his emotions, his pain, his anger. She would have had to answer questions she didn't want to answer. But by mailing back the ring, she denied him that. She denied him any chance of response. She held all the power. And here's where the larger pattern begins to emerge. Because this wasn't the last time Meghan would be accused of walking away coldly, of cutting ties with no warning, of discarding people once they no longer fit her narrative. Trevor wasn't the first to love her deeply, but he may have been the first to experience that love returned in the form of silence and a box. The symbolism of that FedEx package can't be ignored. It's ordinary. It's corporate. It's impersonal. It's the very opposite of romance, love, or closure. It turned a marriage into a transaction, a human connection into logistics. And yet, Meghan carried on as though nothing had happened. While Trevor tried to process the shock, she moved forward, building her career, cultivating her new identity, as though Trevor had been nothing more than a chapter closed. But Trevor couldn't just move on so easily. For him, that package was more than just a ring. It was a message. You don't matter anymore. You don't get a say. You don't get me. And as devastating as it was, it also became the story that would follow Meghan for years. Because in that one act, she revealed a side of herself that the world would come to question again and again. The side that could walk away from love, loyalty, even family, without a backward glance. For Trevor, though, that day was not about Meghan's future or her ambition. It was about the gut punch of being erased, of being replaced, of being treated as disposable. And yet, this wasn't the end of his suffering. Because Meghan's silence didn't just end their marriage. It left him living with questions that would echo for more than a decade. Questions like, was I ever really loved? Did she plan this from the beginning? And perhaps the most haunting of all, if she could do this to me, what else is she capable of? But the real tragedy? Meghan's ghosting of Trevor wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was the start of a larger pattern. And soon, the world would see that Trevor Engelson's FedEx box wasn't just a private heartbreak. It was a warning. Because what Meghan did to Trevor in private, she would one day do in public. Silence speaks louder than words. After the FedEx box arrived, after Trevor opened it and stared at the ring he once believed symbolized forever, there was no follow-up. No phone call. No explanation. No final conversation to soften the blow. Just silence. And that silence was deafening. Imagine the weight of that moment. You've just lost your wife, your partner of nearly a decade, the woman you thought you'd build your future with. And yet, you're not even given the dignity of words. No chance to ask why. No chance to fight for what you built. No chance to even hear her voice one last time. Only silence. Trevor's friends would later say he was shattered, confused, humiliated. Not because the marriage ended. Marriages end all the time. But because of the way it ended. Because the person he trusted most in the world didn't think he deserved honesty. He didn't get closure. He didn't get answers. He got nothing. And silence, in many ways, can be more brutal than words. Words give you something to hold on to. Even if they're harsh, even if they break your heart, they still provide shape to the pain. But silence. Silence leaves you drowning in questions. Silence is a void that echoes louder than shouting ever could. Why didn't she speak to him? Why didn't she explain? Why didn't she at least show him the respect of acknowledgement? Those questions haunted Trevor in the months that followed. And without answers, he was forced to create his own. Was it me? Was I not enough? Did she ever truly love me? Or was I just a stepping stone on her climb to fame? Psychologists often talk about ghosting as one of the cruelest forms of rejection because it denies the victim a voice. It leaves them stuck, frozen in the moment, unable to move forward. And Trevor experienced that firsthand. Meghan's silence wasn't just absence, it was a weapon. It robbed him of the ability to process, to heal, to close the chapter. And here's the part that stings even more. Meghan didn't just ghost Trevor. She ghosted almost everyone around that part of her life. Friends they once shared suddenly noticed she had cut ties. Mutual contacts described Meghan as if she had wiped the slate clean, as if Trevor and their years together were erased from her story entirely. It was like she had disappeared into a new version of herself, one that didn't include Trevor at all. For Meghan, the silence was deliberate. It wasn't forgetfulness or cowardice, it was control. By refusing to engage, she kept all the power. She left Trevor with no platform, no space to argue, no chance to hold her accountable. And that control allowed her to move on unchallenged, to step into her new life without looking back. But Trevor was left behind. Alone in Los Angeles, he tried to pick up the pieces. He poured himself into work. He leaned on friends. He kept his pain private, refusing to lash out publicly, refusing to air his heartbreak in interviews. For 12 years, he remained silent, loyal even in betrayal. And yet, that silence spoke volumes. Because if Meghan's silence was about erasing the past, Trevor's silence was about dignity. He chose not to chase headlines. He chose not to exploit his story. He chose to grieve quietly. But make no mistake, his silence wasn't acceptance. It was survival. Think about how cruelly ironic that is. Meghan ghosted Trevor with silence, and in turn, Trevor survived by embracing silence. Two people, once married, now bound only by the absence of words. But here's where the pattern begins to look even darker. Because Meghan's ghosting of Trevor was not a one-off. No, this became a theme in her life. Family members, friends, even her own father would later describe being cut off, erased, left behind without explanation. And suddenly, Trevor's story doesn't just sound like a personal tragedy, it sounds like a warning. Because if Meghan could silence her husband, erase a decade of love, and vanish without a word, what else was she capable of discarding when it no longer suited her? For Trevor, silence was the wound. For Meghan, silence was the strategy. And as the years passed, that silence became the most telling part of all. But what Trevor didn't know then, in the darkest days of his heartbreak, was that Meghan's cold exit wouldn't just affect him. No, it would set the stage for everything that came later. Her relationships, her marriage to Prince Harry, her dealings with the royal family. The same silence that shattered Trevor would one day echo through palaces, tabloids, and headlines across the world. And it all started with a ring in a box, and silence that said more than words ever could. But here's the twist. Meghan wasn't just ghosting Trevor. She was ghosting her past. And the way she cut him off completely was only the beginning of a much larger reinvention. Ambition at any cost. That was Meghan Markle's mantra, though she never said it out loud. She didn't need to. Her actions spoke louder than any words ever could. And by the time she ghosted Trevor Engelson, by the time that FedEx box had been delivered and silence had taken the place of love, Meghan wasn't just leaving behind a husband. She was leaving behind an entire identity. Let's rewind. Meghan wasn't born into fame. She wasn't born into royalty. She was born into a world where success wasn't guaranteed, where the grind was constant, where every opportunity had to be clawed for. From the start, she wanted more recognition, more power, more influence. Hollywood was her escape route, and Trevor was part of the scaffolding that helped her climb. But here's the catch with ambition. It doesn't stop once it's tasted victory. It grows. It expands. It consumes. And Meghan's ambition wasn't content with being the wife of a producer. She didn't want to stand in the background while Trevor worked behind the camera. She wanted to be the star, the face, the name that commanded attention. Toronto gave her that chance. On Suits, Meghan wasn't just another struggling actress. She was suddenly someone. People began recognizing her. She had stylists, publicists, new friends in glamorous circles. Invitations started flowing in. Meghan began curating herself, her image, her wardrobe, her brand. And slowly, the old Meghan, the wife, the partner, the woman who once leaned on Trevor, disappeared. Here's where the betrayal deepens. Trevor thought he was part of her journey. He thought he was building a life with her, a shared story of success. But Meghan didn't see it that way. She saw Trevor as part of her past, a chapter she had already outgrown. And if there's one thing Meghan has proven time and again, it's that she's willing to cut off anything or anyone that doesn't serve the next chapter she's writing for herself. Think about the symbolism of what she did. Ghosting Trevor wasn't just about ending a marriage. It was about cutting the cord to her old world. No explanations. No lingering ties. No messy emotions. Just severed clean. That's not love. That's strategy. And here's where the pattern emerges. Meghan didn't just ghost Trevor. Later, she would ghost her childhood friends who no longer fit her new image. She would ghost her own father, Thomas Markle, when his presence became inconvenient. She would ghost members of the royal family when loyalty to them clashed with her own ambitions. The common denominator? Meghan. But let's focus back on Trevor. Because while Meghan was reinventing herself in Toronto, Trevor was left to pick up the pieces in Los Angeles. He poured himself into work, threw himself into producing, tried to move forward. But deep down, he carried the sting of being discarded, not just as a husband, but as if he were a placeholder, useful until no longer necessary. Have you ever felt that? Like you were nothing more than a stepping stone for someone else's dream? That once they got what they wanted, you were left behind? That's what Trevor endured. And Meghan's ambition made no room for sentimentality. Let's pause here and ask the audience. Is ambition worth it if it costs you every person who once loved you? Would you trade loyalty, love, and family just to climb a little higher? Meghan did. And the world is still divided on whether she was ruthless or just practical. What's undeniable is this. Meghan reinvented herself with chilling precision. She built a new circle in Toronto, surrounding herself with influencers, stylists, and socialites who helped polish her into the brand she wanted to be. Gone was the Hollywood struggler. Gone was the supportive wife. In her place stood Meghan Markle, actress, starlet, social climber, and eventually, royal in waiting. And Trevor? He wasn't even part of the narrative anymore. He wasn't in her interviews, wasn't mentioned in her growing public presence. It was as if he had been scrubbed from her story completely. But the irony here is that Meghan's ambition, which once seemed unstoppable, is exactly what later created cracks in her royal life too. The same cold decisiveness she used to cut off Trevor would one day shock the royal family. The same refusal to compromise, the same insistence on control, the same ability to vanish without explanation. It all started with Trevor. And here's where the chapter leaves us. Meghan didn't just ghost her husband. She ghosted her old self. She shed it like a skin, leaving Trevor, her friends, her past, all behind. And while the world would one day applaud her reinvention, Trevor lived through the brutal reality of what ambition at any cost really looks like. But as devastating as it was for him, this wasn't the end of his story. Because out of betrayal comes resilience. And Trevor, the man Meghan discarded like an old prop, would soon find a way to rebuild, proving that while Meghan might have silenced him, she couldn't erase him completely. Still, before Trevor's rise, before his healing, came the deepest wound. Because Meghan's ambition didn't just discard him, it forced him to reckon with a cold truth. She had ghosted him for good, and she wasn't coming back. And yet, what Trevor didn't know then was that Meghan's calculated ambition, the same ambition that destroyed their marriage, would later come back to haunt her on a much bigger stage. The royal one that Reveille's heartbreak turns to resilience. When the FedEx box came, when silence swallowed the marriage, Trevor Engelson could have crumbled completely. And for a while, he did. How could he not? Imagine giving nearly a decade of your life to someone, your time, your loyalty, your devotion, only to be discarded without a single conversation. The shock alone can hollow a person out. And Trevor was hollowed. Friends say he was devastated. He wasn't just heartbroken, he was blindsided. Humiliation mixed with grief. How do you explain to people that your wife mailed back her wedding ring like it was nothing more than a misplaced receipt? How do you admit you didn't even get the chance to fight for your marriage? Trevor carried that weight quietly. He didn't lash out. He didn't run to tabloids. He didn't even post cryptic messages on social media. He kept it inside, burying his pain in silence. But silence is heavy. And for Trevor, those early months after Meghan's disappearance were brutal. He lost weight. He worked obsessively. He withdrew from some circles. He felt, as one friend put it, like the rug had been ripped out from under him, and he didn't know how to stand again. Yet here's what makes Trevor's story powerful. He didn't stay down. He didn't let Meghan's betrayal define the rest of his life. Slowly, painfully, he began to rebuild. How do you rebuild after being ghosted by the person you loved most? You start small. You throw yourself into the one thing you can control, your work. Trevor began focusing on his producing career with renewed determination. He'd already been respected in Hollywood, but now he poured every ounce of energy into it, turning heartbreak into fuel. And then there were his friends. The people who knew him before Meghan, the ones who saw his worth beyond the marriage. They rallied around him. They reminded him of who he was, of the man Meghan had discarded, of the life he still had ahead. In those moments of support, Trevor found the beginnings of healing. Here's where the resilience shines through. Trevor could have easily become bitter, vindictive, obsessed with Meghan's betrayal. But he didn't. He chose dignity. He chose silence over scandal. He never sold his story, never tried to humiliate Meghan publicly, never tried to cash in on being her ex. For 12 years, he stayed quiet. Think about that. 12 years. In a world where people write tell-all books over far less, Trevor's silence was extraordinary. But don't mistake that silence for weakness. It was strength. It was a refusal to let Meghan define him. It was Trevor saying, "You may have ghosted me, but you don't get to control my future." And slowly, the future came back into focus. Trevor started dating again. He opened his heart, cautiously at first, but with hope. And eventually, he met someone new, a woman who didn't see him as a stepping stone, but as a partner. They married in 2019 in a beautiful ceremony in Italy, surrounded by people who truly loved them. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. Where Meghan left him with a FedEx box, Trevor built a new life filled with joy, family, and genuine love. Have you ever noticed how resilience often grows in the ashes of heartbreak? Trevor's story is proof. What Meghan meant to destroy, he turned into strength. What she meant to erase, he rebuilt with dignity. And yet, no matter how far he moved forward, the ghost of Meghan lingered. Not because he wanted it to, but because the world wouldn't let it go. Every article about Meghan's rise mentioned Trevor. Every scandal that touched her name dragged his story back into the light. And now, 12 years later, Trevor finally decided to break his silence, not out of bitterness, but out of truth. Out of the simple desire to reclaim his voice after years of being defined only as Meghan Markle's ex-husband. That's resilience. That's survival. That's turning heartbreak into a foundation for something stronger. But let's not gloss over the irony here. Trevor rebuilt with dignity, quietly, humbly, without spectacle. Meghan, on the other hand, rebuilt with ambition, loudly, dramatically, on the world stage. Two very different paths, born from the same marriage, the same ending. And here's where the cliffhanger comes in. While Trevor found peace, Meghan's ambition was only growing sharper, more relentless. And soon, the same coldness that ghosted Trevor would resurface again, not in Hollywood, but in the very heart of the British royal family. Because if Trevor's heartbreak was personal, the royals were about to discover what it felt like on a global scale. Hollywood whispers. They started quietly, like they always do in that world. A half-conversation overheard at a party. A knowing look exchanged between producers. A question asked in hushed tones. Did you hear how she left him? In Hollywood, where image is everything and stories spread faster than wildfire, Meghan Markle's ghosting of Trevor Engelson became the kind of tale people couldn't resist retelling. Because think about it. Actors and producers live for drama, and Meghan had given them one of the coldest, most cinematic endings imaginable. A FedEx box instead of a goodbye? That wasn't just gossip material. That was legend. Behind closed doors, people started murmuring. She mailed the ring back. She didn't even call him. She vanished. These weren't just rumors. They were facts relayed by people close enough to know the truth. And as the story spread, so did the whispers about Meghan's character. If she could ghost her husband like that, what did it say about her loyalty? About her ability to sustain real relationships? About her heart? And here's the kicker. Hollywood is a small town disguised as a big one. Everyone knows everyone. And while Meghan's star was rising in Toronto with Suits, her reputation in Los Angeles was starting to shift. She wasn't just seen as an ambitious actress anymore. She was seen as someone willing to cut ties coldly, someone who could discard even the most intimate relationship without a backward glance. That's when other stories began to surface. People who had once been close to Meghan, old friends, acquaintances, started hinting that this wasn't new behavior. That Meghan had a pattern of dropping people once they no longer served her. Childhood friends left behind. Strained family relationships. A father cut off. The whispers grew louder. Meghan Markle was someone who used people as stepping stones, climbing higher each time, never looking back. And in Hollywood, where loyalty is rare and betrayal is common, that made Meghan stand out, not as a victim of the industry, but as someone who mastered its coldest rules. For Trevor, this was salt in the wound. Not only had he been ghosted, but now his heartbreak was becoming gossip fodder. Imagine being at an event, overhearing people discuss your marriage as if it were just another Hollywood plot twist. Trevor, dignified as ever, refused to contribute to the chatter. He stayed silent, but others filled the silence with speculation. Some defended Meghan. She just wanted more. She outgrew him. That happens. Others were harsher. That's ice cold. Who does that to their husband? If she can walk away from him like that, imagine what she'll do next. And here's where the irony deepens. Meghan thought she was erasing her past by ghosting Trevor. In reality, she had created a legend that would follow her into every room. The FedEx box became shorthand for who she was. People didn't just say, Meghan Markle got divorced. They said, Meghan Markle mailed back her wedding ring. A detail so brutal, so cinematic, that it burned itself into Hollywood memory. But Hollywood whispers don't just stay in Hollywood. They travel. They cross borders. They make their way into other circles. And soon, Meghan's reputation as someone who could vanish without a word would echo far beyond Trevor's world. Because the whispers weren't just about what she had done. They were about what it meant. And people began to notice a chilling pattern. Loyalty was conditional for Meghan. When someone no longer served her narrative, they were cut off, cleanly, coldly, without explanation. That realization carried weight. Because Hollywood may thrive on ambition, but it also thrives on stories. And Meghan's story wasn't just about ambition. It was about the price of it. About the people left behind, discarded, erased. And if Trevor was the first to experience it on such a devastating scale, others would soon follow. Friends, family, even royalty. Because the whispers about Meghan Markle weren't just gossip. They were warnings. And those warnings, ignored at the time, would one day come crashing into the grandest stage of all, the British monarchy. But before that storm hit, Meghan's whispers grew into patterns so obvious they couldn't be ignored. And Trevor's heartbreak wasn't just a private tragedy anymore. It had become a Hollywood cautionary tale, the parallels no one talks about. At first glance, Meghan Markle's divorce from Trevor Engelson and her dramatic exit from the royal family seem like two entirely separate chapters of her life. Different men, different worlds, different stakes. But when you peel back the layers, when you compare the details side by side, a disturbing pattern emerges. A pattern that begins with Trevor and stretches all the way to Buckingham Palace. Let's lay it out. Trevor was blindsided. He woke up one day still married, and by nightfall, his wife had disappeared, her wedding ring mailed back in a FedEx box. No explanation, no closure, just silence. Fast forward nearly a decade, and what do we see? Meghan and Harry standing before the world, announcing that they were stepping down as senior royals. The Queen, Prince Charles, Prince William, all blindsided. Meetings had been ongoing, conversations were still unfolding, yet Meghan and Harry pulled the trigger without warning, dropping their Megxit bombshell on Instagram. Sound familiar? Trevor got a FedEx box. The royal family got a press release. Different packaging. Same cold strategy. And it doesn't stop there. Look at the way Meghan handled relationships in both situations. With Trevor, she didn't confront him. She didn't work through the issues. She vanished. With the royals, she didn't try to adapt, compromise, or fight for change from within. She cut ties, severed completely. And just like Trevor, the monarchy was left stunned, scrambling, asking questions without answers. Here's where it gets even darker. Meghan's pattern isn't about running away, it's about control. By ghosting Trevor, she controlled the narrative. He couldn't question her. He couldn't fight for their marriage. She ended it on her terms. With the royal family, she did the same. By making the announcement public before final agreements had been reached, she forced the monarchy's hand. The Queen couldn't stop it. The narrative was already out there. Again, Meghan left on her terms. Now let's compare loyalty. With Trevor, she abandoned nearly a decade of history without a second thought. With the royals, she abandoned centuries of tradition, duty, and loyalty to the crown. The common denominator? When Meghan feels constrained, when Meghan feels her ambitions outgrowing her circumstances, she cuts ties. Cold, clean, final. And let's not ignore the personal toll. Trevor was humiliated privately, left with nothing but questions. The royal family was humiliated publicly, left to deal with the fallout of a decision they didn't control. Both cases reveal the same Meghan Markle, a woman willing to walk away, regardless of the damage, as long as she comes out with her image intact. Do you see the parallel now? It's not just coincidence. It's a blueprint. But here's what makes this so haunting. Most people didn't recognize the pattern until it was too late. When Meghan ghosted Trevor, it was whispered about in Hollywood, dismissed by some as just another messy divorce. When Meghan ghosted the royals, the world gasped, but they shouldn't have been surprised. Trevor's story was the warning. Meghan's cold, calculated exit from her marriage foreshadowed her cold, calculated exit from the monarchy. And this parallel isn't just about endings, it's about beginnings too. After leaving Trevor, Meghan reinvented herself, polished her image, climbed higher. After leaving the royals, she did the same, multi-million-dollar deals, global platforms, interviews with Oprah. Each time, she didn't just leave, she upgraded. Each time, someone else paid the emotional cost, while Meghan rebranded herself for the next chapter. So here's the question for you. If Meghan's first husband was left with silence, and the royal family was left with chaos, what does that say about anyone who trusts her loyalty now? Is it only a matter of time before history repeats itself again? And here's where the cliffhanger sharpens. Trevor's story isn't just about personal heartbreak. It's about patterns. And those patterns suggest that what happened to him wasn't an accident. It was a preview. And if Trevor's silence for 12 years has now broken into truth, imagine what else he knows. Imagine what else he's been holding back. Because as devastating as this parallel is, Trevor's revelations are about to expose something even more chilling. Why he stayed quiet for so long. Why Trevor stayed silent. Until now. For 12 years, Trevor Engelson said almost nothing. No tell-all book. No revenge interview. No leaked messages. Nothing. And in Hollywood, where secrets are currency and scandal sells faster than popcorn at a premiere, that silence is extraordinary. But why? Why did a man who had been ghosted in the most humiliating way, abandoned by the woman he loved, discarded with a FedEx box, choose silence instead of retaliation? Let's step into Trevor's world in the aftermath of the divorce. He wasn't just dealing with heartbreak. He was dealing with humiliation. Meghan wasn't a global figure yet, but she was rising. And he knew one thing. If he lashed out, if he spoke too soon, he would be painted as the bitter ex-husband. And Meghan? She would play the victim flawlessly. Trevor was savvy enough to understand how narratives work in Hollywood. He was a producer, after all. He knew the press, knew the spin, knew how stories could be weaponized. And he refused to give Meghan the ammunition. His silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. Friends close to him said Trevor chose dignity because he still cared, even after everything. He didn't want to drag Meghan through the mud, didn't want to hurt her career, didn't want to become a headline that would define him forever. Instead, he buried the pain, rebuilt quietly, and let Meghan's story play out without interference. But silence comes with a price. For 12 years, Trevor carried the weight of questions he could never ask and answers he could never give. He had to watch Meghan reinvent herself, rising higher and higher, marrying into the royal family, becoming one of the most famous women in the world. And every time her name hit the headlines, so did his, attached like a shadow, a footnote, The ex-husband she left in the coldest way possible. Can you imagine living like that? Watching the person who ghosted you step into global fame, while your own heartbreak becomes gossip, dissected by strangers who don't know the half of it? Trevor endured that silently, year after year. So why speak now? Why, after more than a decade, is Trevor finally breaking that silence?